Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and I would too acknowledge both the presence of and I welcome the Ukrainian ambassador to our debate. The actions, Ceann Comhairle, this week of the Russian government in recognising the already occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk and moving its military forces across legally recognised international borders are the most serious threat to European peace since the end of the Cold War. Extensive diplomatic efforts involving an array of European leaders, Macron, Schulz and Johnson among them, together with the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, have sought in recent weeks to broker a peaceful outcome, and I strongly commend these efforts. At the core of this crisis is the aim and intention of the Russian president. Clearly, he's enjoying the focus of international attention, but we can't, as yet, be certain of what ultimately he wishes to achieve and what means he's willing to deploy to achieve that. The character of the regime led by Vladimir Putin has been clear to all of us for many years. He's deployed the nerve agent Novichok to poison Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury, England in 2018. This followed the killing of the Putin critic Alexander Litvinenko using radioactive polonium in Russia in 2006. The annexing of Crimea into the Russian Federation in 2014 and the effective occupation by proxies of part of the Donbass region of the Ukraine at the same time has resulted in ongoing conflict, which has already cost 14,000 lives over the past 8 years. So we know what the international community is dealing with. A Russian president, as witnessed by the poisoning and imprisonment of his main domestic opponent, Alexei Navalny, a person who has dominated the Russian state, the Duma and its media. His vision is for a restoration of Russian hegemony over the countries of Eastern Europe, where the Soviet Union once held sway. He wishes, in short, to undo the last 30 years of political history in Europe. If you don't believe that, or if you doubt that, read the words of the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov when he characterized the countries, now many member states of the European Union, members of our union, others who are members of NATO, not as sovereign nations, but as territories orphaned by the collapse of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. Orphans, presumably, to be brought back home to mother. The Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances in 1994 was signed by Russia, and it gave assurances against the threats or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, Belarus and Kazakhstan. It was on that basis, Ceann Comhairle, that those three nations, newly independent, gave up their nuclear weapons. And remember, Ukraine at that stage was the world's third largest stockpiler of nuclear weapons. We've heard some commentary that former Soviet-dominated countries could never join NATO. The NATO-Russia Founding Act was a political agreement signed in 1997, 25 years ago. It established an agreed cooperation between an enlarged NATO and Russia and stated, and I quote, "Countries admitted to NATO will have full rights and responsibilities of membership, and further, the door to membership will remain open to all emerging European democracies." But more fundamentally to us, more fundamentally to this Parliament and to Ireland, who battled so hard to regain our national independence, to control our destiny and our sovereignty, is the right of nations to make their own decisions and not have powerful nations or powerful neighbours make decisions for them. The phrase that we hear often now in a different context, "nothing about us without us," had its origins in Central European political traditions, because too often smaller European nations were simply pawns to be directed by powerful nations and traded over by others without their involvement and without their consent. We thought we'd put all that behind us, that small nations stand equal to larger nations, entitled to make their own decisions about any international organisation they want to belong to or not. We don't have, we thought, any more overarching spheres of influence where large nations determine what smaller nations can do or cannot do. President Putin's speech to his nation on Monday was truly illuminating, describing the now independent nations of the former USSR as our country, blaming Bolshevik leaders, presumably former President Gorbachev, for the nation's breakup. Developments President Putin, clearly wishes to undo, beginning with Ukraine. Ceann Ireland has to stand clearly and strongly with the people of Ukraine, with the principle of self-determination and the inviolability of a nation's boundaries. International law must be upheld, and Ireland must be very clear in that. And my final comment is, I have introduced legislation into this House, known internationally as the Magnitsky Act. I would ask that one of the actions we take is to fast-track that and enact it into the law of this state.
Thank you, Deputy Howlin. Deputy Neil Richmond.